I've lived on my ranch for as long as I can remember. It's been in my family for nearly a century, passed down from my great-grandfather, who carved out every fence post and planted every row of cotton with his own hands. The land holds memories, the creak of the old barn door, the smell of hay in summer, the quiet mornings where only the wind speaks. When the small town started to expand, new housing developments began popping up nearby. One of those developments included an HOA, an association full of rules, regulations, and people who loved holding authority more than common sense. I didn't think much of them at first. My land was separate, clearly, documented in county records and protected by a 99-year land deed. But trouble began the day a new resident moved into the neighborhood. Her name was Linda, though everyone quietly referred to her as the HOA Queen. She was known for nitpicking everything from mailbox height to grass blade length. I expected her to stay on her side of the property line. I was terribly wrong. One morning, I woke to find three strangers standing on my ranch land, pacing around with clipboards as if surveying the place. I approached them, confused and irritated, only to be told they were assessing the common grounds for the HOA's expansion plans. Common grounds? My ranch. I demanded to know who had sent them, and they pointed me toward Linda. I stormed over to the HOA's temporary office, a rented house near the front of the subdivision. Linda stood there with a smug expression, like she'd been waiting for me to arrive. She said my ranch had been miscategorized and was actually part of the newly designated Shared Community Recreational Zone. I nearly laughed in her face. I told her the ranch had been in my family longer than the entire subdivision had existed, and I had documents to prove it. But Linda simply waved her hand dismissively and said the HOA had voted, and the majority agreed to include my land. I reminded her that majority votes meant nothing when it came to private property. That's when she leaned forward, narrowing her eyes, and said that the HOA had authority to reclaim and used or underutilized land. I stared at her, stunned. This was my home, my livelihood, my history. She told me that as part of this community property transition, I would be required to vacate the ranch within 90 days. I told her she would need to step over my cold body before taking even an inch of the soil my family worked for generations. She simply smiled and said, "We'll see." I hired a lawyer the very next morning, someone experienced in land rights and property disputes. When I handed him the 99-year deed, he nodded confidently. "They don't have a legal leg to stand on," he assured me. But what the HOA lacked in legal grounds, they made up for in relentless harassment. Over the next few weeks, they did everything they could to pressure me. They filed noise complaints, claiming my horses were disturbing the peace. They reported my barn to the county, alleging it was an unsafe structure. They even accused me of hoarding livestock without proper permits, all of which were lies. Every time I disproved an accusation, another would follow. Then came the letters, thick envelopes stamped with HOA letterheads demanding fees, citations, and penalties. I ignored them. I didn't owe them a penny. I didn't even live in their subdivision. But their harassment only escalated. I caught two HOA members cutting my fence line, claiming it interfered with a community trail project. When I threatened to call the sheriff, they ran. My patience was wearing thin, but I was determined not to be bullied off my own land. However, Linda wasn't finished, not even close. One afternoon, I received a notice taped to my front door, an eviction notice filed in county court. My heart hammered in my chest. Eviction? On my own ranch. I immediately called my lawyer, who was just as stunned. We drove to the courthouse, and there, in black and white, was a claim that the land had been annexed into the HOA jurisdiction. Attached was a forged document, my signature scribbled sloppily at the bottom. It was supposed to be a voluntary community integration agreement. I felt sick. I hadn't signed a thing. The idea that someone had forged my signature to claim my home was beyond infuriating. My lawyer slammed his fist on the table and said we were going to destroy them in court. But Linda walked into the courtroom with the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable. She had lawyers, board members, and a full stack of so-called evidence. I had proof of the original deed, signed, notarized, filed, and recorded decades ago. I had legacy rights on my side. Yet I could feel the tension rising. HOAs are notorious for dragging out cases, draining people financially until they give up. But I wasn't giving them an inch. Not now. Not ever. The first hearing was brutal. Linda's attorney argued that my land had been historically unlisted as private property, which was a complete fabrication. My lawyer countered every claim with recorded documents, county maps, and archived land deeds. But the HOA kept shifting their argument. They changed their narrative 3 times during the hearing, insisting first that my land was community land, then that it was underdeveloped property subject to conservation oversight, and finally that it had been abandoned by previous owners. I stood and spoke directly to the judge, telling her that this ranch had been in my family for 99 years, and I was still very much alive and living on it. Linda rolled her eyes. But then something unexpected happened. The judge requested original archival proof, the earliest documented version of the deed. That record was stored in the county's historical vault. We needed it retrieved and verified. The hearing was postponed for 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were war. The HOA tried cutting off my access road by piling gravel and construction debris, claiming maintenance. They flew drones over my land, trying to document anything they could twist into a violation. They even sent police claiming I was illegally storing hay. Yes, hay. But every time, the officers arrived, saw the truth, and left shaking their heads. The town was beginning to take notice. And something surprising started happening. People took my side. Neighbors who had once avoided conflict started speaking up. They'd been bullied, fined, and belittled by the HOA for years. Linda's rule had gone unchecked. And now that she had crossed the line with me, it became a rallying point. People came forward with their own stories, mailbox fines, garden bans, fence color disputes, even reports of HOA members trespassing. When word spread about the forged signature, the community was furious. A local journalist reached out to me wanting to do a story. I hesitated at first, but eventually I agreed. The article published with pictures of my ranch, the historical documents, and a detailed account of the HOA's actions. The story went viral in our county. Public pressure mounted quickly. City council members, who previously ignored HOA complaints, began scrutinizing their authority. The HOA board tried to distance themselves from Linda, but everyone knew she was the driving force. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. She held an emergency HOA meeting and declared that the community must stand united against hostile property hoarders. She was talking about me. But now, the community wasn't buying it. The more she tried to twist the truth, the more isolated she became. And then, the day of the final hearing arrived. We walked into the courtroom with a thick binder, the original deed scanned, copied, sealed, and authenticated by the county. My lawyer presented it with confidence. The judge reviewed every page thoroughly. Then she turned to Linda and her attorneys, asking them to provide documentation proving annexation authority. They had nothing. No signatures from previous owners. No transfer of land use rights. No legal documentation. Just a forged agreement with my fake signature. The courtroom fell silent as a forensic handwriting analyst, someone we hired, confirmed the signature was forged. Linda's face went pale. The judge didn't hesitate. She dismissed the eviction claim entirely and granted a restraining order preventing the HOA from stepping foot on my property. Then came the final blow. The judge referred the case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Forging legal documents is a felony. And suddenly, Linda's confident act shattered. She tried to accuse other board members, but no one defended her. She was exposed, cornered, and facing real legal consequences. But for me, the victory was emotional. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I simply breathed a long, heavy breath that felt like the first one I'd taken in months. The ranch is still mine. The fence lines still stand. The horses still graze in the open fields. And the quiet morning wind still carries the smell of hay and dust. But something changed in the community. The HOA board was restructured, almost entirely. Many resigned. Others apologized. The new board issued a formal, written apology, acknowledging their violations and confirming in legal terms that my property lies fully outside their jurisdiction. As for Linda, she moved away while awaiting charges. Some say she went to live with family in another state. Others say she's still trying to run HOAs elsewhere. I don't know. I don't care. What I do know is this. People like her thrive when no one stands up to them. When they are confronted, truly confronted, with truth, resilience, and history, they fall apart. This ranch survived droughts, storms, and hard winters. It was always going to survive an HOA. And now, when the sun rises over the fields, the land feels peaceful again, steady, rooted, unshakable, just like the generations before me intended it to be.